Well, good evening, everybody. Happy Storytime Tuesday. Actually, this time, another 2 weeks has gone by. Because last week, I landed on Tuesday. I got home a little after 7 o'clock. And, well, I was not, ready for a story time stream by the time I got home and ready and, had eaten and all of that fun stuff. So we ended up skipping last week. But now I'm back. And it's time for more Castle Roogna. Going to be starting into chapter 9 this week. For any of you guys who have not checked it out, you can catch any of the previous chapters on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. And chapters 1 through 8 are there, as well as the first two books in the Xanth series. This is, of course, book 3, Castle Roogna. So it says on the book covers that I put up over there next to my picture. So let's have a little bit of a recap as to what happened last week, or last stream, I should say, and then we'll dive ourselves into this week's reading. So, as I recall, it has been a couple of weeks. As I recall, we had the siege of the Zombie Master. And the Zombie Master's castle was attacked. They ended up fighting it off with the help of monsters from the surrounding jungle. Bink had gone out. He talked to the lord of the local jungle, which happened to be a dragon. He had gotten them to come and help with basically promised impunity for any kills of humans during that time. And because of that, they agreed to come in and participate in the attack. And so the monsters of the local jungle came in and helped with the defense of Castle Roogna, of the Zombie Master's castle. And then, of course, the zombies and Door and Millie and Jumper the Spider and all of them participated and fought in defense of Castle Roogna, coming out with the win. And then the Zombie Master spent the evening resurrecting the intact enough bodies into zombies. During the time that Jumper and Door were away, Millie agreed to marry the Zombie Master. So there's going to be a marriage between Maid Millie and the Zombie Master. There is new zombies made from the mundanes who will be coming, as they will all be going to the defense of Castle Roogna. And Jumper and Door and Millie and the Zombie Master and all the zombies will begin their journey to the aid of Castle Roogna. Facilitated because Millie asked it to be so. And the zombie master is sweet on her. Aww. How nice, huh? And there we will begin our story for this evening. And so, everybody, go ahead, sit back, relax, and prepare to enjoy as we will dive into this evening's readings from Castle Roogna. Chapter 9 Journey. In the morning, early but not bright, they set off for Castle Roogna. It would have been easiest to have the rock carry them singly to the castle, but two things argued against this. First, there was an army of about 250 zombies to transport, and for this number, marching seemed to be the only way. Second, the skies were now being patrolled by aerial sentinels, harbingers of the Harpies. The rock, huge as it was, would be torn apart in midair by the vicious creatures, if they decided it was an enemy, as perhaps it was. The zombie master had lived as a recluse so long that he was only vaguely familiar with the terrain, and Dor had not viewed the scenery with an eye to zombie travel when he rode in. The zombies tended to shuffle, and their feet snagged on roots and vines, tripping them or even ripping them off their feet. The majority were mundane zombies, sounder of body than the older ones, but these were as yet inexperienced and prone to accidents. So it was necessary to scout ahead for a suitable route, one more or less level, avoiding dangerous magic, and reasonably direct. Dor and Jumper did the scouting, with the man checking the lay of the ground and the spider reviewing the threats lurking in the trees. They worked together to flush out anything uncertain, to determine whether it should be ignored, eliminated, or avoided. When they determined a suitable portion of the route, they set magic markers along it for the zombie army to follow. All they had to do was stay well ahead, so that they had time to backtrack and change the route if necessary. The wilderness of Xanth was not as sophisticated now as it would be in Dor's own time. The magic had not had as much time to achieve the devastating little refinements and variations that made unprotected paths so hazardous. But there was plenty of raw magic here, and no enchanted paths to follow. Overall, Dor judged the jungle to be as dangerous for him as anything he had known, if he allowed himself to get careless. One of the first things they ran afoul of was dog fennel. The plants had evidently been taking a canine nap, noses tucked under tails, but woke ugly when Dor blundered into them. First they barked, then, gathering courage, they started nipping. Angered, Dor laid about him with his sword, clearing a circle. Then he suffered regret as the creatures yipped and whined, for they really were no threat to him. Each dog grew on a stem, rooted in the turf, and could not move beyond its tether. Its teeth were too small to do much harm. Jumper had jumped right out of the pooch patch, unnipped. The dogs were whimpering now, cowed by the sight of their dead packmates. It was a sad sight. Dor strode out of the patch, bared blade held warningly before him, feeling low. Why did he always react first and think last? Yet, an animal plant who bites strangers must suffer the consequence, Jumper cluttered consolingly. I fell among aphids once, and their ant guardians attacked me, and I was forced to kill a number of them before the rest gave over. Had they any wit, they would have realized that my presence was accidental. I had been fleeing a deadly wasp. Spiders prefer consuming flies, not aphids. Aphids are too sickly sweet. I guess ants aren't very bright, Dor said, comforted by the analogy. Correct. They have excellent inherent responses and can function in societies far better than spiders can. But as individuals, they tend to be rigid thinkers. What was good enough for their grand aunts remained sufficient for them. Dor felt much better now. Somehow, Jumper always came through, rescuing him from physical or intellectual mishap. You know, Jumper, when this quest is over, and we return to our own worlds, it will be a sad parting, Jumper chittered. Yet you have your life to pursue, and I have mine. Yes, of course, but if we could somehow stay in touch. Dor broke off, for they had suddenly come upon the biggest fennel of them all. It was as massive as Dor himself, with a stem like a tree trunk, reaching its horned head down to graze in the nearby grass. That more closely resembles a herbivorous animal, Jumper chittered. See, its teeth are grazers, not flesh renders. Oh, a vegetable lamb, Dor said. A historical creature, extinct in our day. It grows wool to make blankets from. In my time, we cultivate blanket trees directly. But what happens when it grazes everything within its tether range? Jumper inquired. I don't know. Dor saw that the grass had been mowed quite low in the disk the lamb could reach. Little was left. Maybe that's why they became extinct. They went on. The terrain was fairly even here. The zombies would have no problems. Dor set his markers as they went, certain this route would be all right. They approached a wooded section, the trees bearing large multicolored blooms whose fragrance was pleasant but not overwhelming. Be on guard against intoxicating fumes, Dor warned. I doubt the same chemicals would intoxicate me, the spider chittered. But the scents were innocent. Bees buzzed around the flowers, harvesting their pollen. Dor passed under the trees without molestation, and Jumper scrambled through them. Beyond the trees was an attractive glade. There was a shapely young woman brushing her hair. Oh, pardon me, Dor said. She smiled. You are a man. Well, are you lonely? She stepped forward. Jumper dropped down from the trees, a little to one side. What Dor had first taken as clothing turned out on closer inspection to be overlapping green leaves, like the scales of a dragon. She was a soft, sweet-smelling creature with a pretty face. We're just on our way to... I live for lonely men, she said, opening her arms to embrace him. Dor, uncertain what to do in this case, did nothing. Therefore, she succeeded in enfolding him. Her body was cool and firm, her lips sweet. They resembled the petals of roses. His body began to react, as it had with Millie. It wanted to. Friend, Jumper chittered, standing behind the green-leafed woman. Is this customary? I don't know, Dor admitted, as her lips reached hungrily for his. I refer to the shape of the female, the spider chittered. It is very strange. Maybe it was, to a spider. It seems to be. Dor paused, for her lips had caught up to his. Oh, she was intriguing. To be a good shape, he concluded after a moment. Those breasts, that slim waist, those fleshy thighs. I hesitate to interrupt your ritual of greeting, but if you would examine her backside. Sure. Her front side was fully interesting enough, but he did not object to seeing the rest. His body well knew that an attractive woman was interesting from any side. Dor drew back a bit and gently turned the woman around. From behind, she was hollow, like a plaster cast made of some object, or a pottery bowl shaped on a rock. She was a mere solidified shell. She had no functioning internal organs at all, no guts. Cracks of light showed through the apertures where her eyes, nostrils, and mouth were in the front. "What are you?" Dor demanded, turning her about again. From the front she remained extremely womanly. "I am a woodwife," she replied. "I thought you knew. I comfort lonely men." A facade covering absolute vacuity. A man who made love to such a creature. I guess I don't need that kind of comfort," Dor said. "Oh." She looked disappointed. Then she dissolved into vapor and drifted away. "Did I do that?" Dor asked, chagrined. "Did I make her into nothing? I didn't mean to." "I think she existed only for whatever man she might encounter," Jumper opined. "She will no doubt reform for the next traveler." "That will likely be a zombie." Saying that, Dor felt humor bubbling up inside him until it burst out his mouth in a laugh. A zombie lover! Then he remembered Millie's lover of his own time, Jonathan, and sobered. It wasn't funny at all. They went on. The glade opened into a rocky valley. The rocks were irregular, some of fair mass, with cuttingly sharp edges. A disaster for zombies. But down the center was a clear path, with only a little coronet supported on 4 horn-like twigs in the way. All they had to do was remove that object and its supports, and the path would be clear. Dor moved toward it, then paused. This was suspicious. "Something wants us to touch that coronet," he said. "Allow me." Jumper fastened a small stone to a line of silk and tossed it at the coronet. The ground erupted violently. A snake emerged, whose head bore the 4 horns. It had lain buried in the ground except for those 4 points. The reptile struck at the stone as Jumper jerked it along on the string, making it seem alive. Lucky we checked," Dor said, shaken. "Better you than us, Stone." The stone shuddered. "Oh, the poison!" it wailed, and fragmented into gravel. "That must have been some poison," Dor exclaimed. "It was," the gravel agreed, and fractured into a mound of sand. "What would poison do to a zombie?" Jumper inquired. "Nothing, I think. How can you kill a thing that is already dead?" "Then we can ignore the hornworm." Startled, Dor had to agree. "Except we must post a warning for Millie and the Zombie Master, so they know to send a zombie ahead." He walked back and placed a magic marker of the warning type. When they saw that, they would send Igor's ogre ahead to spring the trap. If the hornworm were smart, it would scoot right out of there. The valley spread into a field of grassy growth dotted with mundanish trees. It was pretty scenery, but all of this country was lovely, and improving as they went. If only he had watched more carefully when he rode the dragon horse. One missed a lot by riding swiftly. Then he recognized the vegetation. "Roads!" he exclaimed happily. "If there are any mature ones." "What are roats?" Jumper cluttered. Cereal. Soak old roats in water or milkweed, and they transform into excellent porridge. He shook some stems, obtaining the flat kernels. And those are primitive mixed nut seeds. Nuts grow on trees? The spider inquired dubiously. With magic, all things are possible. Dor went to a tree and took hold of a cluster of nuts, drawing it down. They clung to the branch. These are tough nuts, he said. Then the cluster let go and he staggered back. The branch snapped up, and a small hail of nuts fell about him. One shot by his nose, and he coughed. Others came, and he coughed again. Oh, no! Some of them are cough drops, he said, retreating. But he had his old roats and mixed nuts. Now, all I need is water. The field dropped down to a river, its liquid crystalline, but not, fortunately, crystal. Catfish swam in it, meowing hopefully as they spied Dor, then stalking away as well as their flukes permitted when they saw there was no red meat. A pack of sea dogs sniffed up, but soon spied the cats and went baying after them. Obviously, this water was wholesome. Dor dipped his double handful of substance into a pothole, and abruptly had a doughy mass of food. He offered some to Jumper, but the spider declined, preferring to fish the river for crabs. So Dor ate his pot roast himself, enjoying it immensely. However, this seemingly excellent route was cut off by the same river they had looked for. The stream was small, but deep. No trouble for Jumper and Dor to cross, but disaster for the marching zombies, who would never emerge from it intact. Wading in the quiet moat had been one thing. Swimming across the current was another. It would be possible to fell some trees to form a crude bridge across the water, but this would take time and possibly alert hostile magic. So they followed the river down a way, looking for a better fording place. It was never possible to anticipate what lay ahead. There could be some natural bridge just out of sight. There was not. There was a hill. The river flowed merrily up, over it, and down the other side. Dor and Jumper contemplated this, wondering what to do. A river that flowed up, as well as down, was unlikely to be tractable. I could make a silk sling to swing them across, one by one, Jumper chittered. That would wear you out and take forever, Dor objected. And we would have to wait here until the zombies arrive, instead of scouting out the dangers ahead. We need a bridge or a ford. They followed the river over the hill. I wonder whether we could divert it temporarily, Jumper chittered. We'd still have to get the zombies across it somewhere, Dor pointed out. Unless we could turn it back on itself, and that hardly seems reasonable. At the top of the hill, a cockfish crowed. Oh, shut up, Dor told it, but it was alive, so did not obey him. At the foot of the other side of the hill was an oar, a huge, fat water monster with teeth overflowing its mouth. The water flowed over and around it. No point in trying to cross the stream here. They returned to the top of the hill. I'd hate to backtrack all the way and try to scout a new route, Dor said. This is an excellent route for the zombies, up until this point. We've got to figure out a way across. What makes it flow uphill? The spider inquired. Magic, of course. Something in the ground here that makes it seem to fall, when actually it is rising. I note a different texture of stone here. Could that be it? Could be. Enchanted stone. The magic can't be in the water itself, or it would be floating right up into the sky, I think. Now Dor wondered how water did get into the sky to make it rain. Maybe there were streams that fell upward. So much of the magic of Xanth was unexplained. But if we moved the stone, the river would merely change channels, and then that ore would get dry and come looking for us. The only thing madder than a wet hen is a dry ore. We need to cross the river, not move it. Still, we might experiment. Jumper poked a leg into the water, shifting stones. The water responded by rising higher, forming a little arc in air, then dropping back into its channel. Say, if we could make it jump high enough, we could pass right under it, Dor exclaimed. He plunged in, helping Jumper to move the enchanted stones. The river rose higher and higher. At last an arch formed, leaving the riverbed clear for several feet. If we can lift it just a little higher so they can walk under it without ducking, Dor said eagerly. He moved another handful of stones. Perhaps we should refrain from... Nonsense! It's working beautifully. We don't want the zombies to touch the water at all, because they would get washed out, and they're too stupid to duck properly. Dor scooped some more, and abruptly the river overturned. Instead of arcing forward, it arced backward, forming a loop in the air. It splashed to the ground at the base of the hill, then continued on up and over. Oh no! Dor cried ruefully. For of course now there was no arch. The river landed beside its original channel, then flowed back into it at the top of the hill and on as before. Instead of fashioning a bridge of water, they had doubled the course of the stream. We'll have to move it again. No, Jumper chittered. We might create further difficulties. We can cross it this way. And he showed Dor how there was a narrow channel between the parallel slopes of the river as it spiraled through the air. The water was rising in the west and falling in the east, crossing overhead. It was, in fact, a variant of the original arch. Now the passage across went north-south instead of east-west. Dor had to agree. He placed a magic marker at the loop, and they went on. What a remarkable feature of the landscape they were leaving for the zombies to find. Just as they departed, there was a surprised oink as a sea hog was carried through the loop. Dor chuckled. The landscape beyond the river remained pleasant. It was the nicest region he had seen. He was really enjoying his trek. A complete change of pace from the violence just past, and hoped Jumper was enjoying it too. All too soon they would arrive at the castle, completing their mission, and after that, it would be time to go home. Dor really wasn't eager to return so soon. The best path curled down into the deeper valley, where the river meandered across to form a handsome lake. Dor marveled at this. In his own day, this entire section between the good magician's castle and Castle Roogna was deep jungle. How could it have changed so extensively? But he reminded himself yet again that there was no accounting for magic. Beside the lake was a small mountain, its base the same size as the lake. Perhaps 1,000 paces in diameter, were it possible to pace either mountain or lake. Yet the lake looked deep, and the mountain tall. Though the water was clear, the depths were shrouded in gloom, while snow capped the peak. So both these features of the landscape were probably magically augmented, being much larger than they seemed. This was another type of magic Dor didn't understand. What spell kept snow from melting from the tops of the highest mountains? Since the heights were closest to the hot sun, the heat there had to be fierce, yet they acted as if they were cold. What was the purpose in such a spell? Was it the work of some long-gone magician whose talent was turning hot to cold permanently? No way to know, alas. Well, he might climb up there and inquire of the features of the landscape, but that would be a lot of work, and he had other things to do. Maybe after he returned to his own time. People were there, in the water, and on the mountain, and prancing between. Lovely nude women and delicately shaggy men. "I think we have happened on a colony of nymphs and fauns," Dor remarked. "They should be harmless, but unreliable. Best to leave them alone. The problem is, our best route passes right between mountain and lake, where the colony is thickest." "Is it not feasible to march that route?" Jumper chittered. "Well, nymphs, you know." But of course, the spider didn't know, having had no experience with humanity prior to this adventure. Nymphs, Dor found himself unable to explain, since he was not certain himself. "I guess we'll find out. Maybe it will be all right." The nymphs spied Dor and cried gleeful welcome. "Gleeful welcome!" They spied Jumper and screamed horror. "Horror!" They did little kick-foot dances and flung their hair about. The goat-footed fawns charged up aggressively. "Settle down," Dor cried. "I am a man, and this is my friend. We mean you no harm." "Oh, then it's all right," a nymph exclaimed. "Any friend of a man is a friend of ours." There was a shower of hand-clapping and impromptu dances of joy that did marvelous things to the nymphly anatomy. "Good enough. My friend is Jumper. Would you like to see him jump?" "Oh, yes," they cried. So Jumper made a 15-foot jump, amazing them. It was not nearly as far as he could go when he tried. Obviously, he was being cautious, so they would not know his limitations, just in case. Dor was slowly catching on to adult thinking. It was more devious than juvenile thinking, but he was glad he had thought of the jump exhibit. That made the spider a thing of harmless pleasure for these people. "I'm a naiad," one nymph called from the lake. She was lovely, with hair like clean seaweed and breasts that floated enticingly. "Come swim with me." Dor demurred. Nymphs might not be hollow in quite the way woodwives were, but they were not quite the same as real women either. "I meant Jumper," she cried, laughing. "I prefer to skate," Jumper chittered. He stepped carefully onto the water and slid gracefully across it. The nymphs applauded madly, then dived into the lake and swam after the spider. Once their confidence had been won, it was complete. "I'm a dryad," another nymph called from a tree. Her hair was leaf green, her nails bark brown, but her torso was as exposed and lush as that of the water nymph. "Come swing with me." Dor still had not learned how to handle this sort of offer, but again he remembered the hollow woodwife. I meant Jumper." But the spider was already on his way. If there was one thing he could do better than skating water, it was climbing trees. In a moment, the other dryads were swarming after him. Soon they were squealing with glee, dangling from silken drag lines attached to branches, kicking their feet. Dor walked on toward the mountain, vaguely disgruntled. He was glad his friend was popular. Still, "I'm an Orad," a nymph called from the steep side of the mountain. "Come, climb with me."
"Jumper is busy,"
Dor said. "Oh," she said, disappointed. Now a fawn approached him.
"I see you aren't much for the girls. Will you join us, boys?"
"I'm just trying to scout a route through here for an army," Dor replied shortly.
"An army? We have no business with armies."
"What is your business?"
"We dance and play our pipes, chase the nymphs, eat and sleep and laugh. I'm an Orfawn, associated with a mountain. But you could join the dry fawns of the trees if you prefer, or the nay fawns of the pool. There really isn't much difference between us."
So it seemed. "I don't want to join you," Dor said. "I'm just passing through."
"Come for our party anyway,"
the fawn urged.
"Maybe you'll reconsider after you see how happy we are."
Dor started to demur, then realized that the day was getting late. This would be a better place to spend the night than the wilderness, and he was curious about the life and rationale of these nymphs and fawns. In his own day, such creatures were widely scattered across Xanth, and highly specialized, a nymph for every purpose. The fawns had largely disappeared. Why? Perhaps the key was here. "Very well. Just let me scout the terrain a little farther. Then I shall return for your party." Dor had always liked parties, though he hadn't gone to many. People had objected to his talking to the walls and furniture, learning about all the private things that went on under the cover of the formal entertainment. Too bad, because the informal entertainment was generally far more intriguing. There seemed to be something about adult people. Their natures changed when they got into small groups, especially when such groups consisted of one male and one female. If what they had to do was good and wholesome, why didn't they do it in full public view? He'd always been curious about that. The fawns danced about him merrily, playing their little flutes, as he walked beyond the lake and mountain. They had horn-like tufts of hair on their heads, and their toenails had grown so heavy as to resemble hooves, but they remained human. In the following centuries, the horns and hooves would become real, as the fawns took on their distinct magical identities. He had thought they were real when he first spied the fawns here, but his mind's eye had filled in more detail than was justified. Dor realized that if he or any other man so chose, he could join them, now, and his own hair and toenails would develop similarly. It made sense. The hooves were much better for running about rocky terrain than ordinary feet were, and the horns were a natural defense, albeit as yet token, that could not be carelessly lost the way other weapons could. And as for dancing, those neat, small, hard feet were much better than Dor's own huge, soft, flat things. Suddenly, he reminded himself of a goblin. The subspecies of fawns was already distinguishable, as were the species of nymphs. The dry fawns of the forest had greenish hair and bark-brown fur on their legs and lower torsos, and their horns were hooked to enable them to draw down fruit. Their hoof-toes were sharp, almost spiked, so that they could climb sheer trunks, though as yet they had little difficulty walking on land. Perhaps that was the key to their eventual demise as a species, when they became so specialized they could not leave the trees, and something happened to those trees. Yes. The Orfawns of the mountains had more powerful legs, their hooves merging like those of goats or deer. Even their hands were assuming a certain hoof-like quality, to enable them to scamper up on all fours, and their horns curled back to enable them to butt. The naphons of the lake had flattened flipper hooves and horns pointing straight up like spear tips. They speared foolish fish on them when hungry. They had delicate scales on their nether portions instead of fur. A naphon saw Dor looking at him.
You should see my cousin, the Nerfawn, he called, splashing cheerily. He lives in the sea at the foot of the river, and he has scales like those of a sea serpent, and full flipper feet. He can really swim, but he can hardly walk on land.
Scales and flippers for the sea fawn. Could this specialization eventually lead to the merfolk, the tritons and their counterparts, the mermaids, who had lost their legs entirely in favor of a tail? Yet, he had already encountered a triton here. No, that was at good magician Humphrey's castle 800 years hence. There were no naphons or nerfons in Dor's own time because they had become sea and lake tritons, and the naiads and nereids had become mermaids. He was witnessing the first great radiation of the species of nymph and faun, experiencing firsthand the evolution of a major branch of the creatures of Xanth. It was absolutely fascinating. And subtly horrifying, too, for this was the ongoing dehumanization of man. There had been much killing in the land of Xanth, but even so, the population had declined over the centuries more than the bloodshed could account for, because human beings had deserted their kind, becoming such subspecies as these, tritons and mermaids. Eventually, if this continued, there would be no true humans remaining in the land of Xanth. That was what King Trent was trying to reverse by establishing contact with Mundania. He wanted to infuse Xanth with new, pure human stock without suffering another disastrous wave of conquest. Now Dor appreciated far more clearly the importance of this project. His own parents, Bink and Chameleon, were deeply involved in this effort. "Go to it, parents," he murmured fervently to himself. "What you were doing is more important than what I am doing." Meanwhile, he was neglecting what he was doing, the survey of the zombie route. Dor looked about, discovering himself in a realm of increasing brush. The plants seemed harmless, but they grew larger and taller toward the west. Possibly in the heart of their range they would achieve the status of trees. Some had branches sticking up from the top, bare of leaves, with cross branches projecting at right angles. These looked vaguely familiar to Dor, but he could not quite place them. If they represented a threat, what form did it take? They weren't tangle trees or poison brambles or needle cacti. What was it about them that bothered him? He thought of questioning stray rocks, but didn't want to reveal the nature of his magic in the presence of the fauns. If he became worried enough, he would use his talent. For now, he was just looking. "What are these bushes?" he asked the Orphan, who seemed uncomfortable here on level ground, but had braved it out for the sake of companionship. "Are they dangerous?"
"We never go this far," the Orphan admitted. "We know there are dangers beyond our territory, so we never stray. What is there elsewhere to interest us anyway?"
"Why, the whole world is interesting," Dor said, surprised.
"Not to us. We like it where we are. We have the best place in Xanth, where monsters don't come and the weather is always nice and there's plenty of food. You should taste our mountain dew."
But it is so broadening to travel," Dor protested. remembering guiltily how little he had traveled before he entered the tapestry. Yet he knew this adventure had already matured him considerably.
Who wants to be broadened?
Dor was taken aback. If these creatures really weren't interested. Suppose something happened to this place so that you had to move. You should at least explore more widely, so you were prepared.
Why be prepared?
The Orphan asked, perplexed. Dor realized that the difference between him and these creatures was more than physical. Their whole mutual attitude differed. To question the need for preparedness, why, that was childlike. Well, he was gaining increasing understanding of the roots of the faunish disappearance in Xanth. Of course, the nymphs had similar short-sightedness, but there would always be a market for lovely nude girls, so their survival was more secure. Anything that looked like a pretty girl had its market, even hollow mock-ups like the woodwives. Perhaps, like the harpies, the nymphs would evolve eventually into a single-sex species, mating only with males of outside species. Dor saw that the Orphan was in distress, so relented and turned about. I think this is a good route. I'll explore the rest of it tomorrow, with Jumper. The Orphan was greatly relieved. He danced back toward the mountain, and was soon joined by the less adventurous fawns.
Time for the party!
He cried, doing a caprine skip. The others picked it up as a chant.
Party! Party!
They made a bonfire between mountain and lake, piling on dry bond brush and igniting it with a small, irritable salamander. The salamanders of Dor's day started fires that burned all substances except the ground itself. But this was a primitive ancestor who made a merely ordinary fire, fortunately. This fire would burn only wood and could be extinguished. They put marshmallows from a mallow bush in the marsh at one end of the lake on sticks and toasted them in the flames. The lake nymphs and fawns brought out fresh sea cucumbers and genuine crabs for Jumper. Hot chocolate bubbled up from one side of the lake, making an excellent beverage. The tree creatures brought fruits and nuts, and the mountain creatures rolled a huge snowball down to make cold drinks. Dor did sample the mountain dew, and it was effervescent and tasty and heady. The nymphs and fawns sat in a great circle around the fire, feasting on the assorted delicacies. Dor and Jumper joined them, relaxing and enjoying it. After they had stuffed, the fawns brought out their flutes and piped charmingly intricate melodies while the nymphs danced. The female bodies rippled and bounced phenomenally. Dor had never before seen anything like this. Soon the fawns responded to the anatomical signals, discarded their flutes, and joined the dance in a most unsubtle manner. Before long, it was not a dance at all, but the realization of the ritual the dance had only suggested. These creatures did indeed do openly what the adults of Dor's day did in privacy. "Is this normal procedure?" Jumper inquired. "Forgive my query. I am largely ignorant of the ways of your species."
Yes, this is a regular festival celebrating the rites of spring,
the Orphan said. "No festivals for the other seasons?" Dor inquired.
What other seasons? It is always spring here. Of course, the rites don't result in babies. It has something to do with our immortality. But it's fun to celebrate them anyway. You are welcome to join in.
"Thank you. I regret this is not my species," Jumper demurred. I'll just wait," Dor said. His body certainly felt the temptation, But he didn't want to commit himself prematurely to this life. The mental picture of the woodwife returned.
As you wish. No one is forced to do anything here, ever. We all do only what we want to do.
He watched the proceedings another moment.
Speaking of which, pardon me.
The Orphan leaped forward to nab a passing Oread. The nymph screamed fetchingly, flung her hair about, and kicked up her cute cloven feet, giving Dor a feeling of déjà vu and a glimpse of what clothing normally concealed. Then the fawn brought her down and did what evidently delighted them both. Dor made mental notes. If he ever had occasion, he wanted to know how to proceed. He was already certain that never again would he see a nymphly girl kick her feet without thinking of this scene. A new dimension of meaning had been added to the action. If they are immortal and bear no hatchlings, Jumper chittered, how then do they evolve? Dor hadn't thought of that. Maybe they themselves just keep changing. With magic. Come, join me, a cute naiad cried, wiggling her delicately scaled hips dexterously. I regret that, Jumper began. I meant Dor, she cried, laughing. Dor noted that what these laughs and screams did to the nymph's chest area. Was that why they did such exhalations so often? Take off those silly clothes, and she gave a little foot kick. Dor said, finding himself strongly tempted, despite all his private reservations. After all, if the nymphs were willing... But it would be the first step in joining this colony, and he just wasn't sure that was smart. An easy life, filled with fun? Yet, what was the future in that? Was fun the ultimate destiny of man? Until he was sure, he had better wait. At least you should try it once, she said, as if reading his mind. Probably such mind-reading was not difficult. There was only one channel a man's mind would be in at this stage. There was an ear-rending roar. A torrent of dark bodies burst upon the party. It was a goblin horde.
Press gang! Press gang!
The goblin leader cried, making a gap-toothed grin of joyous malice.
Anyone we catch is hereby impressed into the goblin army.
And he grabbed a dry fawn by the arm. The fawn was substantially larger than the goblin, but, paralyzed by fear, seemed unable to defend himself. The nymphs screamed and dived for water, trees, and mountains. So did the fawns. None thought to stand up, close ranks, and oppose the raiders. Dor saw that there were only about 8 goblins, compared to 100 or more fawns and nymphs. What was the problem? Was it that goblins inspired terror by their very appearance? Dor's hand went for his sword. Goblins did not inspire terror in him. Wait, friend, Jumper chittered. This is not our affair.
We can't just sit here and let them take our friends.
There is so much we do not know about this situation, the spider chittered. Ill at ease, but respecting Jumper's judgment, Dor suffered himself to be restrained. The goblins quickly ran down 5 of the healthiest fawns, threw them to the ground, and bound them with vine ropes. The goblins were capturing, not slaying. They wanted men fit for their army, so Jumper had been correct in his caution, as usual. Dor would have gained nothing by laying about him with his blade. Not anything worth gaining, anyway. Yet still his mind nagged. What sort of creatures were these fawns who welcomed strangers, yet refused to assist each other in an emergency. If they did not fight for their own.
That's 5,
The goblin sergeant said.
one more good one we need.
His darkly roving eye fell on Dor, who stood unmoving.
Kill the bug, take the man.
The goblins closed on the pair.
I think it has just become our affair,
Dor said grimly. It seems you are correct. Perhaps you should attempt to parley.
Parley?
Dor exclaimed indignantly.
They mean to kill you and impress me into their army.
We are more civilized than they, are we not? Dor sighed. He faced the goblin sergeant.
Please desist. We are not involved in your war. We do not wish to. Grab him, the goblin ordered.
Evidently, these goblins did not realize that Dor was not merely a larger fawn, a creature who could be expected to match 5 goblins in combat. The 7 others dived for Dor. Jumper bounded over their heads while Dor's sword flashed in a vicious arc. That was one thing this sword was very good at. 2 goblins fell, blood oozing and turning black. Then Jumper's silk caught the sergeant, and the spider trussed him up with the efficiency of 8 trained legs.
Look to your leader,
Dor cried, smashing another goblin down. The remaining 4 looked. The sergeant was virtually cocooned in silk and helpless.
Get me out of this, he bawled.
The others rushed to him. They had not been eager to fight Dor anyway, since the ratio dropped from 7 to 1 down to 4 to 1. Now they knew they had a fight on their dirty little hands. Then, from the sky, shapes dived. Harpies.
Fresh meat,
the harpy sergeant screamed. Dor knew that was her rank, because the filthy grease on her wings was striped.
Haul it away!
The dirty birds clutched the bodies available. 5 fawns, 3 wounded goblins, and the cocooned goblin sergeant. Great ugly wings beat fiercely, stirring up dust.
Not the fawns,
Dor bellowed, for one of them was the Orphan who had befriended him. He grabbed the Orphan's dangling hooves, yanking him down to the ground. Startled at this vigorous resistance, the harpies let go. Jumper threw up a noose, catching a dry fawn and hauling him down similarly. But the remaining 3, together with the 4 goblins, disappeared into the sky. The other goblins ran away. Had Jumper been right to chitter restraint? Dor wasn't sure. He didn't care about the goblins, but he was very sorry about the 3 lost fawns. Could he have saved them if he had attacked before? Or would he merely have gotten himself trussed up and abducted? There was no way to be sure. Certainly Jumper, once he acted, had done so most effectively. He had nullified the leader instead of mindlessly battling the troops, as Dor had done. Jumper had taken the most sensible course, the one with the least risk. Following this course, they had taken losses, but had not lost the battle. The nymphs and fawns returned, now that the action was over. They were chastened by the double horror of goblin and harpy raids. 3 of their comrades were gone. Obviously, their illusion of security had been shattered. The party was, of course, over. They doused the bonfire and retreated to their various habitats. Dor and Jumper hung from a branch of a large tree. It belonged to no one, since these creatures were not yet at the one creature, one tree stage. Night sank gloomily upon them. In the morning, Dor and Jumper were sober, but they had a surprise. The first nymph to spy Jumper screamed and dived into the lake, where she almost drowned, for she was an Oread, not a Naiad. The fawns clustered around aggressively. Dor had to introduce himself and Jumper, for no one remembered them. They went through the bit about the jumping again and quickly befriended the whole community. Again. They did not mention the Goblin Press Gang raid. Those lost fawns had been forgotten, literally, and the Orphan Dor had rescued obviously was not aware of his narrow escape. The whole community knew that monsters never came here, for this was part of the secret of eternal youth. The fawns and nymphs could not afford to be burdened by the harsh realities of prior experience. They were forever young and necessarily innocent. Experience aged people, as it was aging Dor. "At least the goblins won't do much successful recruiting here," Dor murmured as they left the colony behind and continued west. "You can't depend on troops who have to be taught again each day." "The Harpies won't have that problem," Jumper chittered. The Harpies had been foraging for fresh meat. They had found it. "Nevertheless, the effect may wear off after a few days, when individuals are removed from the locale." Jumper continued. "Had we remained several days, we would have felt the spell's effect and remained forever. Those who are forcibly removed probably revert slowly to their original states." "Makes sense," Dor agreed. "Stay a short time, try it out, have a good time." He thought of the naiad who had tempted him, and of the other naiads in the water with their floating breasts. Then, get caught by the spell, and not remember what else you have to do. He shuddered, partly from the horror of it, and partly from the appeal of it. They continued on into the larger bushes, leaving their trail of markers. The fawns and nymphs would not tamper with the markers. They would not remember what they were for. Within a day or so, the zombie army should pass this region. Dor judged that they had now marked over half the distance from the Zombie Master's castle to Castle Roogna. The worst was surely over, and by nightfall, he and Jumper would be with the king with the good news. "These plants disturb me," Jumper chittered. "Me too, but they seem harmless, just strange." Jumper looked about, as he could do without moving his head or eyes. The direction of his vision was merely a matter of awareness, and Dor had become sensitive to the spider's mannerisms that signaled it. "There seems to be no better channel than this. The ground is level and clear, and there are no hostile creatures. Yet I distrust it." "The most promising paths are often the most dangerous. We should distrust this one because there are no hostile creatures," Dor pointed out. "Let me survey from another vantage, while you continue as if innocent," Jumper chittered. He jumped over a bush and disappeared. Dor walked on. He hardly had to pretend innocence. It was a good system they had. The spider was more agile and could not be caught by sudden drops, thanks to his dragline, while Dor had the solidity of his big mundane body and the power of his sword. He would distract potential enemies while Jumper observed them from concealment. Any who attacked Dor might find themselves looped and hoisted on the line of silk. The bushes now rose taller than his head and seemed to crowd about, though they did not move. The true walking plants seemed not to have evolved in Xanth yet. Dor checked that carefully, however, since there were other ways to move than walking. Tangle trees, for example, snatching prey that passed. Predaceous vines that wrapped around anything foolish enough to touch them, or plants that simply uprooted themselves periodically to find better locations. But these particular plants were definitely stationary. It was his forward progress into their thickening midst that made them seem to swell and crowd closer. They were all so similar that it would be easy to get lost among them. But since he was leaving magic markers, he would not mislay his way, and could always retreat. And of course, Jumper was watching. What would his venture have been like without Jumper? Dor shuddered to think of it. He was sure the big spider's presence was accidental, not planned or anticipated by the good magician Humphrey when he arranged this quest. But without this coincidence, could Dor have survived even his first encounter with the goblins? Had he died here in the tapestry, what would have happened to his body back home? Maybe Humphrey had some way to rend the tapestry and reweave it, so that Dor's death would be eliminated and he could return safely. But even so, that would have been a humiliating failure. Far better to survive on his own, and Jumper had enabled him to do that. So far. Even more important was the maturity of perspective brought by the big arachnid. Dor was learning constantly from that. The juveniles of any species tended to be happy but careless, like the fawns and nymphs. It was easy to contemplate being locked into such innocence indefinitely, but the longer prospects showed this to be a nightmare. Dor was, as it were, emerging from fawn stage to Jumper stage. He laughed, finding the mixed image funny. He imagined himself starting with little horns and hooves, then growing 4 more limbs and 6 more eyes to resemble the spider. Before this adventure, he would not have understood such imagery at all. In the midst of his laugh, something chilling happened, causing him to choke it off. He looked around, but saw nothing, only the plants, which were now half again as tall as he. What had happened to disturb him so? He hadn't quite caught it. He shrugged and walked on. After a moment, to demonstrate better his unconcern and, incidentally, to make sure his exact location was known to Jumper, just in case, he began to whistle. He was not a good whistler, but he could carry a fair tune. And the subtle thing happened again. Dor stopped in his footprints and looked again. Had he seen Jumper from the corner of his eye? No. He would have recognized his friend without even trying. How he wished for several extra eyes now. But the hell with caution. He had seen something, and he wanted to know what. There was nothing. The tall bushes merely sat there, basically mundane, their leaves rippling periodically in the breeze. At the base they were full, their foliage so dense that their trunks could hardly be seen. At the top they thinned, their leaves sparse and smaller, until at the apex they were bare. Some had the central stem projecting straight up for several feet, with several bare cross branches. Strange design for a plant, but not a threatening one. Maybe they were sensors for the sun or wind, conveying information to the plant's main body. Many plants liked to know what was going on, for small changes in the weather could spell great changes in vegetable welfare. Dor gave it up. There was simply nothing here he could detect. He could ask one of the sticks that lay on the ground, of course, but again he balked at that. Something about the naivete of the fawns and nymphs made him resist that device. The fawns and nymphs depended foolishly on their ignorance, their mountain, trees, and lake, instead of on their own intelligence, alertness, and initiative. If he depended on his magic instead of his powers of observation and reasoning, he would never become the man he should be. He recalled how little King Trent used his transforming power. Now that made some sense to him. Magic was always there as a last resort, It was the other qualities of existence that need to be strengthened. So he held off, avoiding the easy way, determined to solve this one himself. Maybe what he sought was invisible. In his own day, there were said to be invisible giants, though no one had ever seen one. How could they? He chuckled. Again it happened, as if triggered by his noise. And this time he caught it. The top of one of the plants had moved. Not swaying in the wind, it had moved. It had turned deliberately, rotating on its trunk axle to orient on him. Thor considered this. He took several steps forward, whistling, watching, and the antenna swiveled to follow his progress. No doubt about it now. The thing was focusing on him. Well, plants were also wise to keep track of mobile creatures, for the approach of monsters or man could signal instant destruction, especially if it were a salamander in a bad mood or a man looking for wood to build a house. What better way to keep informed than a rotary antenna? So, this was probably harmless. Dor had been concerned because he had seen the movement without an object. He had been thinking in terms of animals or tangle trees, not simple wooden rotation. He walked on with renewed confidence, still whistling. More of the antenna plants were evident now. This seemed to be the mature stage of the bush. The little ones at the fringe had no antenna. The medium ones had antenna, but couldn't rotate them. The grown ones were fully operative. Just so long as they did nothing but watch. Assuming they could watch without eyes. Probably they could. Dor knew there were other senses than man's, some just as effective. Maybe the plants resonated to sounds, hence reacted to his laughter, which must seem strange indeed to them, or to the heat of his body, or the smell of his sweat. How would they react to the zombies? He smiled privately. The zombies might make quite a stir wherever they passed. The forest, for such it had become, opened into a grassy glade. In the center there was a depression, and there was a mound in it. The mound appeared to be made of wood, yet had no branches or leaves. What was it? The antenna trees merely looked. They did not act. That would not protect this forest from threats unless there was something else. Something that could act, once the trees had pinpointed the threat. Could this be an action device? Dor would ordinarily have left it alone, for it could be folly to mess with things not understood. But he was scouting a path for the zombie army, and he did not want to lead it into some devious trap. Probably this growth was harmless, as it seemed to be immobile, but he had to be sure. He was not so foolish as to step on it, of course. He cast about for deadwood, finding an old dry branch, and used it to poke the object. He could just reach it this way, standing on the rim of the depression. He would not have been surprised if water poured forth in a fountain, filling the bowl, or if the knob had sunk into an awesome hole. This whole woods could be carnivorous, luring animals to the center, dumping them into its maw. But nothing happened. His speculations had been foolish. Why should trees go to so much trouble when it was so much easier simply to grab passing prey, as tanglers did, or to repel intrusions by brambles or forget spells or bad odors? There had been no lure either. He had come here only because he needed a good route through. Well, whatever it was did seem to be inert, therefore probably harmless. the zombies could pass safely. Dor turned about and saw Jumper. There seems to be no threat, Jumper chittered. Have you determined the nature of this formation? Dor froze. The spider had come up quietly behind him, sneaking up, intent on mischief. Only by chance had Dor turned in time. Now the sinister creature was pretending to be innocuous, until he could get close enough to bite off Dor's head with his gruesome chiliquery. Is there something the matter? Dor chittered, his ugly, huge green front orbs glinting evilly. You look unwell. May I render assistance? And the monster took a step toward Dor with his hairy long legs. Dor whipped out his sword. "Back, traitor!" he cried. "Come not near me!" The spider stepped artfully back as if confused, only far enough to remain beyond slash range. Friend, what is the meaning of this? I seek only to help. Goaded beyond endurance by the thing's duplicity, Dor lunged. The sword sped forward with a precision that would have been unattainable by his own body, but the hairy arachnid jumped right over his head, out of the way. Dor whirled. Jumper had landed on the wooden knob. Even in his righteous rage, Dor had some caution. He did not wish to step into that mysterious depression. So he stood at the rim, on guard, watching the enemy spider. Jumper's attitude had changed. He balanced neatly on 6 legs, his long front 2 legs stroking the air softly. Dor recognized it as a fighting stance. So, you attack me without provocation, the creature demanded, and there was a harsh edge to his chitter. I should have known better than to trust an alien thing. The stick Dor had used to poke the knob lay at his feet. He picked it up awkwardly with his left hand, keeping his sword ready with his right. You were the one who betrayed trust, he cried, poking at the spider. It was a tactical mistake. Jumper threw a line around the end of the pole and jerked it to him. Dor was almost hauled into the depression before he let go. He staggered back. The spider seized his opening. He jumped across the depression, landing beside Dor. He threw another loop, catching Dor's sword arm, drawing him off balance. But Dor reacted with the fighting reflexes of his powerful body. He jerked the arm back. Such was the strength and weight of his body that it was the gross arachnid who was now hauled off balance. No single leg of the spider's could match Dor's arm. The muscle tissue simply wasn't there. Jumper came forward, not falling because it was just about impossible for a thing with 8 legs to fall, but lurching toward Dor. Dor reversed his motion and slashed viciously with his sword. The spider shot straight up, barely avoiding the cut. There was no overhanging branch here, so what went up had to come down. Dor stood below with his point straight up, waiting for the spider to skewer himself on it. But he had reckoned without the creature's monstrous agility. Jumper landed on the sword, feet first, all 8 of them closing around the tip of the blade, supporting him. His weight carried blade and arm down, and Dor collapsed under it. Immediately, the spider's sickening strands of web were all about him, entangling him. Dor closed his left fist and rammed it into the spider's soft abdomen. The flesh gave way disgustingly, and strands of silk stretched and snapped. Then Dor put both hands on the sword and hauled it up, half carrying the spider with it. He kicked with one foot to dislodge his antagonist, but this was another error. The spider looped that leg, drew his line in tight, and Dor had 2 hands and the leg tied together. Those spindly spider legs were savagely swift. Dor fell on his back, fighting to free his limbs, but now the spider was all over him, throwing strand after strand around him, drawing them in tight. Door heaved mightily, snapping more strands, but his strength was giving out. Soon he was helplessly bound. The monster brought his head close to Door's head. The horrible, hairy green teeth parted, ready to crush Door's helpless face into a pulp. The sharp fangs were extended. The two largest green front eyes glared. Door screamed and kicked his bound feet and flung his head about as uselessly as Millie ever had. How had he come to this? Yet even in this moment of annihilation, he retained some human perspective. "Why did you ever pretend to be my friend?" he demanded. Jumper folded his jaws closed. "That is an excellent question," he chittered. Then he backed off, adjusted his lines, and dragged Door over the ground toward a large tree. The antenna at the tree's top rotated to cover him, but could do nothing. The spider jumped to a stout branch, fastened a line, then hauled Door laboriously into the air to dangle helplessly. Then he descended his own dragline to land beside Door. "The answer is, I did not pretend to be your friend," Jumper chittered. "I made a truce with you and treated you fairly, believing that you would honor that truce in the same fashion I did. Then suddenly, without warning, you attacked me with your sword, and I had to defend myself. You were the one who pretended." "I did not!" Door cried, struggling vainly against his bonds. "You sneaked up on me." "I suppose it could be interpreted that way, but you attacked me, not I you." "You jumped right at me, snagging my sword. That was an attack." "That was after you took your blade to me and prodded me with the stick. Then I recognized your hostile nature and took appropriate action." But the spider paused, considering. "I felt no hostility to you until that moment. Why should a stick provoke me when a sword did not?"
"Don't you understand your own alien nature?" Door demanded.
"Something incomplete here. When did you become antagonistic toward me?"
"When you tried to sneak up on me and kill me, of course."
"And when did that happen?"
"What fool game are you trying to play?" Door demanded. "You know I was looking at the wooden knob."
"The wooden knob," the spider repeated thoughtfully. "My own realization of antipathy came when I landed on that knob. Can that be a coincidence?"
"Who cares?" Door cried. "You sneaked up on me first."
"Consider. You poked that knob. You touched it, indirectly, and became hostile to me. Then I touched it and became hostile to you. That knob must have something to do with it." The logic began to penetrate Door's emotion. He had poked the knob just before what happened. He knew the spider was his enemy, yet... "Magic can do many things," Jumper continued. "Can it change friendship to enmity?"
"It can make strangers love each other," Door said unwillingly. "I suppose it could do the opposite."
"The antenna plants were tracking our approach. Had we been hostile to this forest, how would it have defended itself?"
"It would have thrown some spell, of course. Since the trees aren't active the way tanglers are, make us fall asleep or get itchy or something."
"Or get angry with each other."
"Yes, that too. Anything is possible." Door paused. "Our fight? A spell?"
"The antenna observed us. Had we passed through without stopping, nothing would have happened. But we remained too long, poking into things, so the forest struck back, setting us against each other, reversing our feeling for each other. Would that not be an excellent defense?
Reversing emotion. That would mean the stronger the friendship, the worse the.
I am extremely angry with you, Jumper chittered.
I am absolutely furious with you.
Are we both as angry as it is possible to be? That would indicate a very strong friendship.
Yes,
Dor cried, and it was as if a band about his heart had burst.
this spell. He could set whole armies against each other,
he exclaimed, seeing it.
The moment anyone jogs the knob, he activates it.
The logic had now penetrated to his core, and he had no further doubt they were the victims of a malignant spell. His hate for his friend was dissipating. It simply was not reasonable in the circumstance. Jumper's approach had not been sneaky. The spider normally moved silently, and Dor's attention had been taken by the knob. Dor had assumed Jumper was his enemy for no good reason, except enchantment. May I release you now? Jumper chittered.
Yes, I realize what happened. It was a temporary spell, losing power with time.
Reason abates much magic, Jumper agreed. He swung across, and with a few deft motions freed Dor. I regret this happened, he chittered.
So do I. Oh, I'm so sorry, Dor. Or Jumper, I should have realized.
I was caught too. Emotion overcame reason. Almost.
But tell me, why didn't you bite my head off? I thought you were about to.
The temptation was great, but one does not ordinarily kill a defenseless enemy unless one is hungry. One stores the meat alive until needed, and I do not like the taste of your type of flesh. So it was counter to logic to slay you, and that bothered me. I prefer to be governed by logic. I try to understand the complete situation, to achieve perspective at all times, to get all 8 eyes on it, as we arachnids chitter.
I didn't try to think things out, Dor admitted ruefully. I just fought.
You are younger than I, therefore immature and thoughtless, prone to errors of ignorance and emotion. How well he knew it. The spider's maturity had saved them again, providing the time and thought they needed to fight free of the spell.
Just how old are you, Jumper?
I hatched half a year ago, in the spring.
Half a year? Dor exclaimed. I was born 12 years ago. I'm way older than you.
I suspect our cycles differ, Jumper said diplomatically. In another quarter year, I shall be dead of old age.
Dor was shocked. But I've hardly had time to know you.
It is not how long one lives, but how well one lives that is important, Jumper chittered. This quest with you has been generally excellent living.
Except for the goblins and the mundanes, Dor said, remembering.
You ventured in quest of the healing elixir at great peril to yourself, to enable me to survive the mundane's torture, Jumper reminded him. Perhaps the episode was worthwhile, showing me the extent of your loyalty. Come, let us finish our mission without regret. Would he have been so nice about having one of his own legs pulled off to verify the friendship of the spider? Dor doubted it. It seemed he still had some maturing to do. They dropped to the ground and set their markers to skirt widely around the enchanting wooden knob. This forced defense seemed unnecessarily devious. But of course, an obvious trap could more readily be circumvented. Dor found himself sobered, and not merely by the hostile magic. Jumper, dead in 3 months. And Chapter 9 is finished. Very good, guys. Very good. I hope you enjoyed Chapter 9. For sure, for sure. I will go now and, yes, invite Jeeves to make me some tea. Oh, yes, very good, sir. Yes, all right on. Gonna take a quick bio break, and then I will be right back. Oh, yes, everyone, I have returned from my bio break and ready to continue on with you this evening. Hope you guys enjoyed our journey chapter of Castle Roogna. And now we will continue ourselves in with Chapter 10. Of course, if you missed any of Chapter 9, you can check it out later this evening. I'll have it posted up on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SirArminius. You can find links to all of my socials on my new voiceover website, maloneyvoiceover.com. You'll find links to my Twitch, my Facebook, my YouTube channel, my voiceover stuff, all there as well. I've been sharing that. That's what I've been working on while I've been home on my sabbatical. Um, so you can check that out there as well. That'll have links to all of that stuff, but I'll have the links to this stuff up there later. You know, any of these recordings up there later this evening. And then, yeah, we'll be good. Excuse me. Must be allergic to work, you know? All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump back in here, shall we? Gonna kick ourselves in with Chapter 10. Chapter 10 Battle. They arrived at Castle Roogna without further significant event in the afternoon. The king was highly gratified by their tidings. So, you persuaded the zombie master. How did you do that? Actually, Millie did it, Dor said, remembering the possible limitations of his own actions. She is marrying the zombie master. That must have been some effort you people put forth. It was. Better to omit the details. How soon until the zombies arrive? It should be within a day of us, if nothing goes wrong. Then Dor put his hand to his mouth. But we marked the route so that nothing can go wrong. Let's hope so, the king said dryly. We had better establish regular communication. That will be a problem, because the goblin forces control the ground, and the harpy forces control the air. I did not summon my troops home because their passage through monster-controlled territory would have been unconscionably hazardous, so I have no military couriers. Let me see. He pondered briefly, while Dor suffered a bad qualm. No troops to defend Castle Roogna. Too bad there's not a river flowing between us. I'll have to use the ground. The dragon horse, Dor exclaimed. No, I let my dragons go too, to defend their home sites, which are more vulnerable than this tall castle. Let's see what sort of fish we have. Fish? Dor asked blankly. But they can't. The king led the way to the royal fish pond, while Dor's prior qualm grew into a full-fledged funk. No troops, no dragons, and now the king planned to depend on fish? King Roogna netted a bright goldfish. Let me see, he said, concentrating. The fish turned blue. Ice formed on the water. Oops, I made it a cold fish, Roogna said. That's no help. He concentrated again. The fish became a fiery red, and the water boiled with the thrashing of the creature's tail. No, that's a bold fish. I am having a difficult time. Dor merely watched. The king was performing significant magic, his misses more potent than any lesser person's wildest successes. The king concentrated again. The fish turned brown, its skin worm-like. Ah, there's my ground fish, he exclaimed, satisfied. He scribbled a note, wadded it into a ball, and inserted it into the fish's mouth. He spoke to it. Go, check on the zombie army, and report back here with the zombie master's reply. The fish nodded, then swam through the net and into the wall of the pond, disappearing. Now, let's see what else offers, the king said. He moved into the royal aviary and netted a bird shaped like a ball. Its wings were so stubby it could hardly fly, and its beak and claws projected only marginally. This round dove really isn't much use in this form. He concentrated. Suddenly a great, ugly strap appeared, constricting the dove's body. No, no, the king said, annoyed. Must Murphy's Law foul me up even on minor details? Not a bound dove. I want a ground dove. And the bird turned the color of the groundfish. There. Now you wait here until I have a message to send. Then you fly through the ground and deliver it. He returned his attention to Dor.
You are a comparative stranger to me, magician. Yet I have faith in you, and in your friend Jumper. I am extremely short of personnel at the moment. Will you accept a position in my service?
Dor was taken aback. Your Majesty, I am only visiting here. Soon, very soon, I must go home.
The king smiled grimly. I would offer you transportation as I did before, but I am short of that, too, and the goblins have closed in around the castle. Your only egress is toward the castle of the Zombie Master, and even that is uncertain now. I would prefer that you weather the siege here at Castle Roogna, even if you choose not to participate.
Another siege. I was just in one.
This one will be worse, I assure you. We have greater resources than the Zombie Master did, but the situation is more complicated. I would rather oppose mundanes than goblins and harpies.
The Dragon King had suggested the same thing. Worse than what they had gone through at the Zombie Master's castle. Dor could still not believe that. He had fought goblins and harpies and found them revolting, but not that devastating. And the enemy forces were not actually attacking Castle Roogna. They just happened to be staging their own private war here. Still, it would be pointless to try to travel through the midst of these hordes. Well, I have a few days yet. Might as well be of what help I can.
Excellent. I shall put you in charge of the north ramparts. You will have to keep strong rein on the centaurs there, but they'll mind you if they respect you. They must be working on the wall as long as possible. Every stone laid in place augments our security.
Oh, I'm not a leader, Dor protested. I'm only...
My roadrunners kept me informed of your progress before enemy forces closed in. It is true that you are not yet an experienced leader, but you seem to have good potential. You responded excellently during the mundane attack on the Zombie Master's castle.
Your spies saw that? I thought you had no knowledge of what happened there.
The king laughed. It is wise for a king to have greater information than he allows others to be aware of. My spies could not approach near the battle itself, but there were reports of a man answering your description making a deal with monsters, and something about green sashes, and of course a message I received from the Dragon King. I inferred that you knew what you were doing. I really do not have first-hand information, however, which is why I was eager to have your report.
But the king had pretty good second-hand information. King Roogna resembled King Trenton in certain fundamental ways. Perhaps all kings had an inherent similarity. There was something about them. Perhaps it was a special aspect of maturity.
One day you will understand, Dor, Roogna said. It is evident that your land is grooming you for the office, and in this way, I can, to a certain extent, repay you for your services to me. You should make a credible king, with proper experience.
Dor doubted that, but didn't argue. He didn't follow how doing another service for King Roogna constituted Roogna's repayment to him for a prior service. If this were adult logic, he certainly fell short of it. The groundfish poked its head out of the ground at their feet. The king reached down to take the wadded paper from its mouth.
"Thank you, courier," he said. "You may return to your pond for some refreshment now."
He spread out the paper, frowning.
"This is from the Zombie Master himself. Your marked path is good, but they are now surrounded by goblins and cannot proceed. How far are they? Just beyond the antenna grove.
An image of himself fighting his dearest friend came to him. What a horror!
If any goblins bother the center of that grove, they are too canny for that. They are waiting for the zombies to clear the grove before taking any action.
Why do the goblins care about the zombies? It's the harpies they're fighting, isn't it?
An excellent point. The zombies should be able to march on unmolested, unless something is wrong.
And obviously, something is wrong, Dor said. I'm beginning to get annoyed at Magician Murphy.
I have been wrestling with this sort of thing since our contest began. Do you suppose I normally require several efforts to adapt magic to my specific purpose? Yet, it is a good exercise in discipline.
Yes, Dor agreed. After this, I will be much more careful about everything I do, because I know things don't have to go right just by themselves. The king looked east, though the problem was too far away to see.
Quite likely the antenna forest is annoyed by the presence of so many troops, so has put the notion into the goblins' minds that zombies are enemies.
But if the goblins have stayed out of the forest,
their army has, but their advance scouts would naturally poke into everything, exactly as you did. If a scout brought back news of an enemy force,
we'll have to rescue them, Dor cried.
We really lack the personnel, the king said regretfully. All we have are the centaurs, who must remain at work on the wall. That is, in fact, why we need the zombie help. It is uncertain that we have enough force to protect the unfinished castle, and we dare not deplete our resources further.
But the zombies are coming to help you. Without them, you may lose anyway.
Yes, it is a problem whose solution I have not yet fathomed. Murphy's curse is taking hold very powerfully, blocking all my efforts.
Well, I didn't go to all this trouble only to get the zombie master and Millie captured my goblins, Dor said hotly. I'll go out myself and bring them in.
I would prefer that you not risk yourself, Roogna said, frowning. It is not that I am insensitive to their fate. It is that I am sensitive to the fate of the greater number. We can help them best from Castle Roogna, if we can help them at all.
Dor started a hot retort, then remembered how Jumper had controlled his reactions in the antenna forest and saved the situation. Logic had to prevail, not emotion. How can we do this?
If it were possible to bring a squadron of harpies to that vicinity.
Yes, Dor cried. Then they'll fight the goblins, and neither side will have a chance to worry about zombies. But how can we do this? The harpies will hardly honor any request we might make.
The problem, as I see it, is the lure. We need to attract them to the region without sacrificing any of our own personnel.
No problem at all, Dor said excitedly. Do you have a catapult?
I do. However, harpies will not pursue flying rocks.
They just might, after I've spelled those rocks. Let me talk to the ammunition.
There is a unit on the north wall, where I had thought to place you anyway.
What? Is something going right? Dor asked, smiling.
This is a complexly developing situation. Murphy cannot cover every detail of every contingency. His talent, like mine, is being stretched to its utmost. We shall soon know who is ultimately the more powerful magician. Yes, I guess so. And we have several magicians on our side. However, a single bad foul up could foil all our efforts. In that sense, Murphy can match any number of magicians. I'd better get to that catapult. Do we have the location of the Harpy forces? The centaurs are conversant. They have no love for harpies or for goblins, and their senses are keen. The king turned. I will send a message to the zombie master, asking him to move forward as soon as the harpies appear. Dor hurried to the north wall. Incomplete as it was still far more substantial than the walls of the zombie master's castle. It was hard to imagine little goblins successfully storming such a massive rampart, especially when they were actually fighting harpies. Narrow stairs led around and up through the interior of the wall until they debouched on the level upper ramp. The centaurs were nervously pacing the rampart. They were neither the scholars of Dor's day nor the warriors of another day. They were comparatively simple workers, not well equipped for war. Each carried a bow and a quiver of arrows. However, centaurs always had been fine archers. The crew was supposed to be engaged in construction, but the big stone blocks lay where they had been hauled, unplaced, while the centaurs looked out over the terrain. The king has put me in charge of this wall, Dor announced, attracting their attention. We have 3 things to do. First, we must complete the construction of this wall as far as we can before the fighting starts. Second, we must defend it when the monsters arrive. And third, we have a special mission. I am going to put a spell on the shot for this catapult, and... Who are you? A centaur demanded. It was the first one Dor had met, the one who had refused to tell him where King Roogna was, and who had incited the other centaurs against Jumper. What a foul break, to have to work with this particular creature and crew. Foul break? It was a Murphy break. That curse was getting stronger, not weaker, as the end approached. The supposedly good break of having the catapult right where Dor had been assigned anyway was no good break at all. This was his worst possible location. But he had to fight that curse. After all, he was a magician too, and if that meant anything... Centaur, I am the magician Dor, he said coldly. You will address me with the respect my status requires. The bug lover, the centaur exclaimed. He put his hands on his front hips. He was a large, muscular brute, taller than Dor's body. Dor was sure that his body's facility with the sword would give him a physical advantage over this creature, but he hardly wanted this to degenerate to a common brawl. Now that the centaur had called his bluff, defying him, what was Dor to do next? This was no occasion for nicety of expression, and there was no time to win the centaur's confidence or respect slowly. Dor had to get to the heart of the matter in minutes, so he would have to use his talent. Come aside with me, centaur, he said. What I have to say to you is private. Aside with you, bug lover? The creature demanded incredulously. He strode forward and made as if to swing his fist, and Dor's sword pointed at his throat. Dor's body had done it after all, acting before thought. But in this case, it was an appropriate response. The centaur blinked. He had been impressively countered.
That gleaming blade could have pierced his arteries before he drew back, and could still do so. He decided to accede to the private talk, at least until he could get his hooves into fighting position. Dor sheathed his sword abruptly and turned his back, as if completely unconcerned about any action the centaur might take. And of course, if the centaur struck now, it would be an act of cowardice in full view of his crew. He followed Dor to a separate place on the wall, where the catapult stood behind a battlement. Dor turned and looked at the centaur's work harness. "What is his name?" he asked it.
Cedric Centaur,
the harness replied. The centaur jumped, startled but unspeaking. "What is his real problem?" Dor asked.
"He's impotent,"
the harness responded.
"Hey, you can't,"
Cedric started, but it was too late for him to conceal his secret. This was a thing Dor did not properly understand, but he needed to in this case. "What is impotent?"
"He is."
"I mean, what does impotent mean?"
"Impotence."
"What?"
"You should have said, 'What is impotence?'"
the harness said.
"Never mind,"
the centaur exclaimed, agitated.
"I'll work the catapult."
"I'm not trying to tease you," Dor told him. "I'm trying to solve your problem."
"Ha!"
the harness said derisively. "No smart remarks from you," Dor snapped at it. "Just explain what is impotence."
"This stallion can't stallion. Every time he tries to..."
"Enough!" Cedric cried.
"I told you I'd work that catapult or any other chore. And I won't call you bug lover anymore. What more do you demand?"
Dor was getting a notion of the problem. It was similar to what his body felt when he stopped it from responding to Millie or to an inviting nymph. "I'm not demanding anything. I'm just..."
"Put him with a filly, he's a gelding,"
the harness quipped.
"You never saw anything so."
Cedric put his hands to the harness and ripped it off by brute strength, his face purple-red. "That will do," Dor said. "I just want to have harmony among us. I won't tell anyone else about this." He addressed the broken harness. "You may be broken, but you can still talk."
"Oh, I'm hurting,"
the harness groaned. "Now you understand how Cedric feels. It is not nice to make fun of someone's incapacities." Dor was thinking of the way bigger boys had made fun of him back in his own time.
"It sure isn't,"
the centaur agreed.
What is responsible for Cedric's impotence?" "A spell, of course,"
the harness said, chastened. Now the centaur was startled.
"A spell?"
"What spell?" Dor asked.
"An impotence spell, dummy." "Don't you talk to the magician like that,"
the centaur exclaimed, giving his harness a shake.
"I mean, how does it operate?" "It reverses the normal urges at the critical moment, so..."
"The stronger the urge, the stronger the hang-up," Dor said, remembering his experience in the Antenna Forest. That was a mean sort of spell. "So when he gets close to his sexy dapple gray filly, he..."
"I'm gonna burn this harness,"
Cedric cried, but he did not seem wholly displeased. He must have believed his condition was a fault of his own, and the discovery that an external spell caused it was good news. "How may that spell be abolished?" Dor asked.
"I wouldn't know that,"
the harness said.
"After all, I'm only an item of apparel. I only know what I have observed."
"Then how do you know about this spell?"
"This oaf was asleep when the spell was cast. I wasn't. I never sleep." "How can you sleep when you're not alive?"
Cedric demanded, some of his natural belligerence returning. "Who cast the spell?" but the harness did not answer him.
Was it my rival Fancy Face? I'll boot his tail through his snout.
Who cast it? Dor asked.
Celeste did it,
The harness replied smugly.
That's my filly,
Cedric cried.
Why would she?
He paused, his unhandsome face working.
Why, that little bitch of an equine. No wonder she was so understanding. No wonder she always made such a point of being true to me. She knew why I couldn't.
I'm sorry I can't discover the cure, Dor said.
Don't bother about that, magician,
Cedric said.
Centaurs don't work magic. Chad have gotten the spell from some human witch. All I need to do is go to some shyster warlock and buy a counterspell. But I won't tell Celeste.
He smiled with grim lust.
Oh no, I won't tell her. I'll just let her lead me on as usual, teasing me, and I'll fake it until... Oh, is she gonna get a surprise?
They returned to the crew.
How's the bug lover doing?
One of the other centaurs called, neighing. Cedric turned to fix the other with a steely stare.
I'm doing just great, he said. So is the magician. We're gonna help him all we can, and do just exactly what he says. Aren't we?
It was not a question. Dor affected not to notice the chagrin of the other centaurs. They had been brought in line, without doubt. Where is there a harpy flight within catapult range? He asked. A centaur at the parapet cocked his head.
That way,
he said, pointing north.
That way, sir,
Cedric corrected him, delivering a swift cuff on the flank.
You address the magician with proper respect.
Just call me Dor, Dor said. He had made an issue of respect, but now was disinclined.
They're coming in from the gap, Sir Dor,
the parapet centaur said. Can you drop a shot to the southwest of them?
I can drop a shot down the leader's beak face, Dor, Cedric said, right in her craw.
Well, I really wanted to their southwest. Cedric shrugged.
Colts play.
The centaur gathered about the catapult, cranking it back and fastening its boom and lifting the hefty rock into its sling. They oriented the device toward the northeast and adjusted the elevation. Now repeat after me until you strike the ground, Dor said to the stone. Harpies are bird-brained stinkers.
Harpies are bird-brained stinkers,
the rock repeated gleefully. Fine, Dor said. Cedric fired. The arm of the catapult sprang up. The missile arced over the forest, and the rock cried out, Harpies are and was lost to Dor's hearing. Now, we want to lob the next one southeast of that, until we have a chain of them leading the harpies to our due east, near the antenna forest.
I understand, magician, Cedric said. Then what?
Then they'll encounter the goblin band in that region. The centaur smiled.
I hope they wipe each other out.
Dor hoped so too. If there were too few harpies, the goblins would still block the zombies' route. But if there were too many harpies, they would block the zombies' route, and the ploy might be too late. Already reports were coming in of tremendous goblin armies advancing from the south, and the harpy flights from the north were swelling voluminously. Castle Roogna was still the focus of the war, thanks to the continuing and dire power of Murphy's curse. Magician, a dulcet voice said behind Dor. He turned to find a mature woman standing on the ramparts. I am Neo-Sorceress Vadni, come to assist in the defense of this wall. How may I be of service?
Neo-sorceress? Dor asked with undiplomatic blankness. He remembered Murphy saying something about a sorceress who was helping the king, but the details had fogged out.
My talent is judged to be shy of sorceress level, she said, her mouth quirking.
What is your talent?
Dor realized he was being too direct, but he simply had not yet mastered the social graces of adults. Topology.
What?
Topology. Shape-changing.
You can change your shape? Like a werewolf?
Not my own shape, she said. Other shapes.
Like making rocks into pancakes?
No. My talent is limited to animate shapes, but I can't change their natures.
I don't understand. If you changed a man into a wolf,
he would look like a wolf in outline, but would still be a man. No heavy fur, no keen wolf nose. Topology is not true transformation.
Dor thought of King Trent, who could change a man into a wolf who could do everything a real wolf could, and who could produce wolf offspring. That was a superior talent, much greater than this mere shape-changing. I guess you're right. You're not a sorceress. For some reason he didn't know, there were no female magicians, only sorceresses. Still, it sounds like good magic.
Thank you, she said distantly.
We won't know how you can help here until we see what side attacks, if either side does. The goblins will have to scale the wall, so we can push off their ladders as they hook them over. But the harpies will fly in. Can you topple? Can you perform at a distance?
No, only by touch, she said.
That's not much help. He pondered, oblivious to her grimace. Maybe you better stand at the rim and change goblins into the shape of rocks as they come over the top.
We can use them for catapult shot,
Cedric exclaimed. Good idea, Dor agreed. Now, I'll make the stone of the ramparts talk to distract enemies, so don't any of you be fooled. The object is to make the enemy creatures attack the wrong things, breaking their weapons or their heads and giving you time to handle them. Of course, we hope they won't try to storm this castle, since they really have no reason to. But you know Murphy's curse. If the goblins and harpies leave us alone, we'll leave them alone. Meanwhile, you centaurs get as many blocks placed on the wall as possible. A single one could make the difference. The centaurs went to work with a will. Stones were emplaced and mortared rapidly. This was a good work crew, when it wanted to be. In due course, the king summoned Dor and Vadni to a staff meeting. Jumper was there too. He had been given charge of the east wall defense. Magician Murphy was also present, to Dor's surprise.
The goblins have sent an envoy,
King Roogna said.
I thought all of you should be present for the meeting.
As he spoke, a typically gnarled goblin entered. He wore short black pants, a small black shirt, and enormous shoes. He had the usual goblin scowl.
We require your castle for a camping base,
the goblin said, showing his discolored and jagged teeth.
We give you 1 measly hour to clear out.
I appreciate your courtesy, King Roogna said, but this castle is as yet incomplete. I doubt it will be of much use to you.
You deaf or just stupid?
The goblin inquired.
I said clear out.
I regret we are not disposed to do that. However, there is some nice little ground to the east you might use.
Useless against flying monsters. We need elevation, battlements, shelter, and great supplies of food. We come in 1 hour. If you are not gone, we shall eat you.
The goblin spun awkwardly about on his ponderous feet and departed.
Now we have the envoy from the Harpy forces, the king said, half concealing a quirky smile. The oldest and croniest of Harpy hens flapped in.
I saw that goblin,
she screeched.
You are consorting with the enemy. Your gizzards will bleed for this.
We declined to let the goblins use our premises, King Roogna said.
I should think so. We will use your premises,
she screeched.
We need roasting space, cells for captives, kitchens for raw meat.
I regret we cannot make our facilities available to you. We are not choosing sides. That was for sure, Dor thought. Both sides were repulsive.
We'll claw you into quivering chunks,
she screeched.
Making deals with goblins? Treason! Treason! Treason!
She flapped out. So much for the amenities, King Roogna said. Are the ramparts ready?
As ready as possible, Jumper chittered. The situation is not ideal.
Agreed. The king frowned. The rest of you may not appreciate the full gravity of the situation. Goblins and harpies are very difficult creatures to deal with. They are more numerous than humans, and have massed themselves, while our kind is dispersed all across the land of Xanth. We cannot reasonably expect to withstand siege by their forces without the aid of the zombies. And even then, it will be difficult. The zombie master has been delayed. He glanced at Magician Murphy, but is on the move again. He glanced at Dor. The question is, will he arrive in time?
An excellent question, Murphy said. Shall we agree that if the zombie master fails to arrive before the battle commences?
The king glanced at the others questioningly. Dor visualized the battlements. The goblins would have to scale some 30 feet of walls buttressed by the square corner towers and round mid-wall towers, after fording the deep moat. He couldn't see how they could be a serious immediate threat. The harpies normally struck by picking people up and carrying them away. The centaurs were too heavy to be handled that way. Why then was the king so grave? Even unfinished, Castle Roogna should be proof against these threats. A long siege seemed unlikely, because the besiegers would be killing each other off and running out of food.
What happens if the zombies don't arrive before the battle starts? Dor asked.
It would be a shame to have damage done to this fine edifice. Perhaps loss of human life, Murphy explained. It is only sensible to abate the curse before the situation gets untoward.
You mean you can call off the whole Goblin Harpy battle? This whole siege? Just like that?
Not just like that. But I can abate it, yes.
I find that hard to believe, Dor said. These armies are already well on their way. They aren't just going to turn around and go home just because you...
The king's talent is shaping magic to his own ends. Mine is shaping circumstances to interfere with others' designs. Alternate faces of similar coins. All we have to determine is whose talent shall prevail. Destruction and bloodshed are no necessary part of it. In fact, I deplore and abhor.
There has already been bloodshed, Dor exclaimed angrily. What kind of macabre game is this?
A game of power politics,
Murphy responded, unperturbed. A game where my friend was tortured by mundanes, and its life threatened, and the two of us were pitted against each other, Dor said, his anger bursting loose. And Millie must marry the zombie master, too. He cut himself off, chagrined. So, you have an interest in the maid, Vadney murmured, and had to give her up. That's not the point. But Dor knew his face was red.
Shall we be fair?
Murphy inquired meaningfully.
Your problem with the maid is not of my making.
No, it isn't, Dor admitted grudgingly. I apologize, magician. Adults were able to apologize with grace. But the rest...
I regret those things as much as you do,
Murphy said smoothly.
This contest with the castle was intended to be a relatively harmless mode of establishing our rights. I would be happy to remove the curse and let the monsters drift as they may. All this requires is the king's acquiescence.
King Roogna was silent. If I may inquire, Jumper chittered, Dor's web translating for all to hear. What would be the long-range consequence of victory by Magician Murphy? A return to chaos, Vadney replied. Monsters preying on men with impunity. Men knowing no law but sword and sorcery. Breakdown of communications. Loss of knowledge. Vulnerability to mundane invasions. Decrease of the importance of the role of the human species in Xanth. Is this desirable? Jumper persisted.
It is the natural state,
Murphy said.
The fittest will survive.
The monsters will survive, Dor cried. There will be 7 or 8 more mundane waves of conquest, each with awful bloodshed. The wilderness will become so dense and horrible that only spelled paths are safe for people to travel. Wiggles will ravage the land. There will be fewer true men in my day than there are in yours.
Oops, he had done it again. Magician, exactly where are you from? Vadney demanded.
Oh, you might as well know. Murphy knows.
And did not tell,
Murphy said. Murphy has honor, once you understand his ways, Vadney said, glancing at the magician obliquely. I once sued for his hand, but he preferred chaos to an organized household. So I am without a magician to marry.
You sought to marry above your station,
Murphy told her. Vadney showed her teeth in a strange crossbreed of snarl and smile.
By your definition, magician. Then she returned to Door. But I let my passion override me. Where did you say you were from, magician? Door suddenly understood her interest in him, and was glad he could prove himself ineligible. It would be as easy to deal with Helen Harpy as with this woman, and for similar reasons. Vadney was no soft and sweet maid like Millie. She was a driven woman on the prowl for a marriage that would complete the status she craved. I am from 800 years hence. So is Jumper.
From the future,
King Roogna exclaimed. He had stayed out of the dialogue as much as possible, giving free rein to the expression of the others. But this forced his participation.
exiled by a rival magician?
No, there is no other magician in my generation. I am on a quest. I think I'm going to be king. Eventually, as you surmised before. The present king wants me to have experience. Obviously, King Roogna had not discussed Dor's situation with anyone else, letting Dor present himself in his own way. More and more, Dor was coming to appreciate the nuances of adult discretion. It was as significant as much in what it did not do in what it did do. I'm only 12 years old, and...
you are in a borrowed body.
Yes, it was the best way for me to visit here, using this mundane body. Another creature animates my own body, back home, taking care of it during my absence. But I'm not sure that what I do here has any permanence, so I don't want to interfere too much.
So, you know the outcome of the Roogna Murphy wager,
the king said.
No.
I thought I did, but now I see I don't. Castle Roogna is complete in my day, but it stood deserted and forgotten for centuries. Some other king could have completed it, and there have been all those waves I mentioned, and all the bad things, and the decline of the influence of man in Xanth. So Murphy could have won.
Or I could have won, and held off the onset of chaos for a few more decades,
Roogna said. Yes, but from my vantage 800 years away, I just can't tell whether the chaos started in this year or 50 years from now. And there are other things that don't match, like the absence of goblins on the surface in my day and the relative scarcity of the harpies. I just don't know how they all fit in.
Well, what will be, Roogna said. I suppose from that vantage of history, what we do here has little significance. I had hoped to set up a dynasty of order, to keep Xanth wholesome for centuries, but that does not seem to be fated to be. It is a foolish vanity to believe that a man's influence can extend much beyond his own time, and I shall be well rid of it. Still, I hope to do what good I can I can within this century, and to leave Castle Roogna as a monument to my hope for a better Xanth. He looked around at the others. We should make our decision according to our principles. Then we should fight to preserve order for as long as it can be preserved, Dor said. For a decade, for a year, or for a month. Whatever we can do is good. Murphy spread his hands.
We shall in due course discover whether even a month is feasible.
I believe the consensus is clear, King Roogna said. We shall defend the castle, and hope the zombie master gets here in time. They returned to their stations. Almost immediately the trouble arrived. From the south, the dusky banners of the great goblin army came, marching in a gathering tread that shook the castle foundations. Dor stood atop the northeast corner tower and looked over the ramparts to spy it in the distance. Drums beat, horns tooted, keeping the cadence. Like a monstrous black carpet, the army spread across the field beyond the castle. Light sparkled from the points of the goblins' small weapons, and a slow half-melody carried under the clamor, like muted thunder. The goblins were chanting,
1, 2, 3, 4, kill 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, kill 2, 3, 4.
on and on endlessly. There was not much imagination to it, but plenty of feeling, and the effect expanded cumulatively, hammering into the mind. They had allies, too. Dor spied contingents of gnomes, trolls, elves, dwarves, ghouls, and gremlins, each with its own standard and chant. Slowly, a gnarly tapestry formed, a patchwork of contingents, the elves in green, dwarves in brown, gnomes red, trolls black, marching, marching. There seemed to be so many creatures they could bury the castle under the sheer mass of their bodies, stretching the grisly fabric of their formation across the ramparts. Yet, of course, they could not. Mere numbers could not scale a vertical wall. Then from the north flew the harpies and their winged minions, casting a deep shadow across the land and castle, blotting out the sun. There were contingents of ravens and vampires and winged lizards and other creatures Dor didn't recognize, in their mass resembling gross storm clouds darkening the sky in segments. The light permitted to penetrate at the perimeters only to delineate the boundaries. Thus the shadows traversed the ground in large squares, an ominous parallel advance. The point of convergence, of course, was Castle Roogna. The two armies might indeed obliterate each other, but they would wreak havoc on the castle in the process, if they ever got inside it. Suppose a battle took a long time. The inhabitants of the castle could starve, waiting for it to end, even if the walls were never breached. And if the goblins had siege machinery or used the larger trolls to batter the walls, while the harpies and vampires ravaged the upper reaches. Now Dor was coming to appreciate how unpleasant the siege could get. The mundanes had made only sporadic assaults against the castle of the zombie master, but the goblins and harpies were here in such great numbers that their attack would be unremitting. There would be inevitable attrition of the castle defenders until no further defense was possible and the castle was overrun. They had to have renewable defenders. That was the key role the zombie master played. As long as the battle continued, there would be raw material for new zombies, who would protect the ramparts from intrusion by living creatures. As yet, there was no sign of the zombies. Even if they appeared at this moment, there would not be time for them to shuffle to the castle before the goblins closed in about it. The zombie master was too late. Had Dor's ploy with the talking catapult stones failed? Or been insufficient? He should have had the king check on that with his ground fish. Magician Murphy walked by. He seemed to have complete freedom of the premises.
Tut, it really is too bad. Sensible people could spare themselves the awkwardness of the curse.
Cedric Centaur glowered.
Were you not a magician, I would call you an illegitimate snot-winged dung-fly.
Dor kept silent. The centaur had put it aptly enough. Dor spied a boomerang in the arms rack on the wall of the centaur brace tower. Are you magic? He asked it.
Naturally. I always return to the sender's hand.
Magician Murphy shook his head, shrugged, and departed. His curse seemed to operate independently of his presence. He had just been poking around. Well, Dor said to the boomerang, Take a look and see if you can spy the zombie army. He hurled the boomerang out over the landscape to the northeast. He was conscious of the anomaly of calling 250 creatures an army, when the harpies evidently had thousands and the goblins tens of thousands. But the zombies were renewable. They could become an army of thousands in due course. The boomerang spun far out, flashing in the dwindling patch of sun remaining before the harpy force, describing a tilting circle. Soon it smacked back into Dor's hand.
"Any goblins?" it reported. "No zombies."
Dor sighed. "We'll just have to hold out until they come." But he was pessimistic. Nothing in his experience had prepared him for the magnitude of this confrontation. There were so many monsters. Once the goblins closed about the castle, how could the zombies ever get through? First things first, there were harpy forces to deal with. They were looming much faster, like an ugly storm, already about to break over the north wall. "Cease construction! Ready bows!" Dor ordered the feverishly laboring centaurs. They obeyed with alacrity, but immediately he saw that there were more flying monsters than there were arrows in all the centaurs' quivers. This would be no good. "Do not shoot," he told them. "Let me speak first to any arrow you fire." A squadron of vampires bore down on them, their huge leathery wings repulsive, their glistening fangs horrifying. "Repeat after me," Dor told the first arrow Cedric had ready. "Neighbor, you couldn't puncture a rotten tomato." The arrow repeated it. Objects really enjoyed simple insults. "Keep saying it," Dor said, and nodded to the centaur to fire. "Over their heads," he told Cedric. Cedric looked surprised, but didn't argue. He raised his elevation and let the shaft go. They watched as the arrow flew high. It missed the forward rank of vampires and sailed over their heads. Dor knew the other centaurs thought this was a wasted effort. Why fire an arrow intended to miss? Suddenly there was a disturbance in the forward ranks. "Oh yeah!" a vampire cried. At least his shrieks sounded very much like that, and spun in air to sink his long fangs into his neighbor's wingtip. The victim reacted angrily, sinking his own fangs into the nearest other wingtip available, thus involving a third vampire. The formation was so tight that in a moment the whole configuration was messed up, with vampires fighting each other in an aerial free-for-all, milling about and paying little further attention to the castle or the goblins beyond it.
"That was a neat ploy, magician,"
Cedric said. Dor was glad he had taken the trouble to convert the surly creature, instead of fighting him. Jumper had shown him that, if there were any way to make friends with the goblins and harpies, could it be done at this late date? Suppose the goblin females could be convinced to appreciate the best of the males, instead of the worst. And the harpies, if they had males of their own species again. All it would take was some sort of mass enchantment for the goblins and the generation of at least one original harpy male from the union of a human with a vulture. There was a love spring north of the gap, and no way to get to it now. Anyway, the thought was plausible, but it revolted him. What human and what vulture would volunteer to? In any event, it would be too late to save the castle, for it took time for any creature to be conceived and birthed and grown. Years to produce a single male harpy, even if everything were in order. They needed something to abate this battle right now, and Dor knew that no matter what he tried, Murphy's curse would foul it up, as if it had the effort to parley with the both sides. Castle Roogna would just have to weather the storm. Now a horde of goblins charged from the east, surrounding the castle. The goblin army had advanced from the south, but spread out so far to east and west that they had been able to view the wings plainly from the corners of the north wall. At this stage, it was closing in like water flowing around a rock in a stream. There was no longer any disciplined marching or measured tread or beat of drums. The army had reverted to its natural horde state. The goblin allies must be attacking the other walls. Here in the north, there were only pure goblins, and Dor feared they would be the most determined opponents. The disorganized cloud of vampires was now impinging on the ramparts. Quickly, Dor walked the battlements, addressing the projecting stones of the completed portions.
Repeat after me. Take that, Fang Face. My arrows are trained on you. Here comes a fire arrow.
Soon he had a medley of such comments from the wall, calculated to phase of vampires as they came close. Dor hoped the vampires were too stupid to realize there were no archers there. This allowed him to concentrate his centaurs on the incomplete section of the wall, which still lacked its battlements. The centaurs on the east wall threw cherry bombs to disrupt the onslaught. Bang, and a goblin flipped over and collapsed. Bang, and another went. But there were more goblins than cherry bombs available. Then boom, as a pineapple blasted a crater, hurling bodies outward like straw dolls. But the goblins did not even pause. They charged through the smoking hole, over the fresh corpses of their comrades, right up to the moat. The moat monsters rose up to meet them, snatching goblins from the back and gulping them down whole. But still the goblins came, forging into the water.
I didn't know goblins could swim, Dor remarked, surprised.
They can't, Vadney said. The goblins surrounded the moat monsters, clawing, punching, and biting them. The monsters snapped quickly, gorging themselves. And while each could consume a dozen or so goblins, there were thousands crowding in. The monsters retreated to deeper water, but the goblins splashed after them, clinging like black ants, pinching like nickel beads. Many were shaken loose as the moat monsters thrashed, and these sank in the murky depths, while others came on over them.
What point in that? Dor asked incredulously. Aren't they going to try to build bridges or something? They're dying pointlessly.
This whole war is pointless, Vadney said. Goblins aren't builders, so they don't have bridges.
They don't seem to have ladders either, Dor remarked, so they can't scale the wall. This is completely crazy.
On and on the goblins came, sinking and drowning in droves, until at last the moat itself filled with their bodies. The water overflowed the plain. Now there was a solid mass of flesh across which the horde poured. The moat monsters had been stifled in that mass. There was no remaining sign of them. The goblins advanced to the base of the wall. There was no great strategy in their approach. They simply continued scrambling over each other in their effort to mount the vertical rampart. Dor watched with morbid fascination. The goblin sea tactic had filled in the moat and gotten the survivors across, but that could not carry them straight up the stone wall. The goblins did not stop. The hordes behind kept shoving forward, refusing to recognize the nature of the barrier. As the first ones got trampled down, the next ones got higher against the wall. Then the third layer formed, and the fourth. The wall here was not complete, yet there were some 30 feet from moat to top, even at this lowest point. Did the foolish creatures think they could surmount that by trampling the bodies of their comrades? It would take 30 layers of crushed goblins. Amazingly, those layers formed. Each layer required a greater number of bodies because it sloped farther back across the moat. But the creatures kept coming. 5 layers, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Already they were a third of the way up, building an earthwork of their own dead and dying. Cedric stood beside Dor, looking down at this horror.
I never thought I'd feel sorry for goblins, he said. We're not killing them. They're killing themselves, just to get up over a wall of a castle they don't need.
Maybe that's the difference between men and goblins, Dor said, and centaurs.
But he wondered. The mundanes, who were, after all, true men, had stormed the castle of the zombie master with as much determination and little reason as this. And the centaur crew had not shown any particular enlightenment prior to Dor's private session with Cedric. When the fever of war got into a society, still the goblin tide rose. Now it was halfway up and still progressing. It was no longer possible to see where the moat had been. There was only a monstrous ramp of bodies slanting far out from the wall. The goblins charged in and up from their seemingly limitless supply, throwing their little lives away. There did not even seem to be any conscious self-sacrifice in this. It was plain lack of foresight, as they encountered the barrier and were ground down by those still shoving from behind. Those below chomped savagely on the feet of those above, before the increasing press of weight killed them. Maybe the goblin chiefs behind the lines knew what they were doing, but the ordinary troops were just obeying orders. Maybe there was a charge forward spell on them, overriding the selfish self-preservation goblins normally evinced. With horror that mounted as the mass of goblins mounted, Dor watched. Against such a tide, what defense did they have? Arrows and cherry bombs were pointless. They would only facilitate the manufacture of bodies to use as supports for the next layer. Now, at last, Dor understood why the king had been so concerned about this threat. Goblins were worse than mundanes. Meanwhile, the harpy forces were regaining some semblance of order. Dor had prepared a number of arrows, and these had fooled the dull vampires for some time. The speaking battlements had helped considerably, but now the harpies themselves were massing for a charge. They had nearly human intelligence, and would hardly be fooled long by inanimate devices. They seemed to be progressing toward an assault timed for just about the moment the goblins would finally overflow the wall. Probably this was neither coincidence nor Murphy's curse. The dirty birds merely wished to make certain that the goblins did not capture the castle. Dor and the centaurs would be jammed to death the same way the moat monsters had been. The worst of it was, there did not seem to be anything they could do about it. The enemy forces were too numerous, too mindless. "This is where I come in," Thadney said, though she was tight about the mouth. "I can stop the goblins, I think." Dor hoped so. He glanced nervously around at what he could see of the other walls. They were higher and had more explosive armament, so seemed to be in less difficulty. He wondered how Jumper was doing. He could not see the spider from here. Even the arachnid's great facility with silk could hardly stop these myriad goblins. The first goblin hand hooked over the rim of the battlement, or rather the place where the battlement had not yet been constructed. Thadney was ready. She touched the hand, and the goblin became a ball that rolled down the slope of piled bodies. Another hand appeared. She bawled the second goblin. Then a host of hands came, keeping her moving. The layers were piling up to either side of the low spot now, so that she had to jump to one side and then to the other to catch them. Soon she would be overwhelmed. She could not hold the wall alone. No one could.
"Let the harpies come in!"
Thor cried to the archers, who had been selectively shooting the leaders of any potential charge, delaying that aspect somewhat. As the arrows stopped, the harpies and vampires swarmed in. The vampires were not bright, but they had caught on that they were being manipulated, and now were bloodthirsty. But the most obvious enemy was the goblin horde. The flying creatures fell upon the goblins, literally, and plunged fang and claws into them. The goblins fought back viciously, jabbing fists into snouts and stubby fingers into eyes, and wringing necks. They seemed to have lost what weapons they had in the course of the scramble upward, or maybe they just preferred to meet their enemies on the most basic level of animosity. It was a respite of sorts for the castle defenders, but now the bodies piled up even faster, higher and higher, mounding as tall as the rampart. Soon the goblins would be able to roll down into the castle, and Vadney's magic would be largely ineffective. No sense getting buried in balls.
"Can you make them smaller, like grains of sand?"
Dor yelled over the noise of battle.
"No, their mass is the same. Whatever shape I give them, I can't stop the mounding."
Too bad. King Trent could have stopped it by changing them into gnats, so small they could never mound up over the wall. Or he would have changed a centaur into a salamander and used it to set the bodies on fire, reducing them quickly to ashes. Vadney really was less than a magician. Not that Dor was doing any better. He had helped hold them off for a while, but could not stop them now. Then he had an inspiration. "Make them into blocks!" he cried. She nodded. She got near the gap in the battlement, while Dor protected her flank with his sword. Suddenly, the goblin blocks began appearing. These were much smaller than the big stone blocks used in the construction of the castle, but larger than ordinary bricks. The centaurs shoved them into position on the wall, shaping it crudely higher. The goblin blocks were now holding back the tide of goblins.
"Now that's what I call a good goblin!"
Cedric exclaimed.
"A blockhead!"
But even good blockheads weren't enough. They tended to wiggle and sag, though Vadney made some with interlocking edges. They were not as dense as stone, or as hard, and squished down somewhat as the weight of other blocks went on top. As Vadney had suggested, a goblin in the shape of a block was still a goblin. Not much good for anything. Again, Dor scavenged his brain for an answer. How could Castle Roogna be defended against this horrible mass of attackers? Even the corpses were enough to bury it. A ground dove poked its head out of the floor. Dor took the message from its beak while continuing to slash about with his sword, protecting Vadney's back.
"How goes it?"
Paper inquired.
"Repeat after me, continuously, until the king hears,"
Dor told the paper. He could not afford to take his attention off the goblins and harpies long enough to write a note.
"We can hold out only 5 minutes more. Situation desperate."
He put the repeating paper back in the dove's beak and watched it swim, or rather fly, down out of sight through the stone. He didn't like making such a bleak report, but had to be realistic. He and Vadney and the centaurs had done everything they could, but it was not enough. If this wall fell, the castle would fall. The attack was more than ever like a savage storm. with the tide of goblins on the surface and the clouds of harpies in the air, and now there was no way they could halt the sheer avalanche of creatures. Could even the zombies have abated this menace? Yes, they could have, Dor decided, because a zombie master would change the pile-up bodies to zombies, who would then hurl the live zombies and many of the dead ones back away from the ramparts. If only the zombie master were here. In moments, the king himself was at the wall.
"Oh my goodness!"
King Roogna exclaimed.
"I had no idea it was this bad. The two wings of the goblin horde must have converged here on the far side of their thrust, and doubled the pile-up. On the other walls it was only halfway up. You should have summoned me before."
"We were too busy fighting goblins," Dor said. Then he shoved the king, moving him out of the way as a harpy dive-bombed him. She missed, cursing.
"Yes, this is definitely the region of greatest crises,"
the king said, as several goblin balls rolled across the wall and dropped off inside the castle courtyard. He bent to peer at a goblin block, and it peered back, balefully cubic.
"The highest tide, the lowest wall. You have done well." "Not well enough,"
Dor said, skewering another diving harpy.
"We are about to go down under their charge."
As if that was not obvious.
"I have some emergency enchantments in the arsenal,"
Roogna said.
"They are hazardous to health, so I had not wished to employ them. But I fear the occasion has arisen."
He ducked a vampire.
"Get them!"
Dor cried, growing desperate at this delay. Why hadn't the king told him there was more magic available?
"Your Majesty?" "Oh, I brought them with me just in case."
The king brought out a vial of clear fluid.
"This is the concentrated digestive juice of stomach of dragon. It must be dispensed upwind of the target, downwind of the user. If any drifts—"
He shook his head dolefully.
"Murphy's curse could cost us one king. Seek cover, please."
"Your Majesty," Badney protested, "you can't risk yourself."
"Of course I can," the king reproved her. "This is my battle, for which all the rest of you are risking yourselves. If we lose it, I am lost anyway."
He wet a finger and held it to the wind.
"Good. It is blowing west. I can clear the wall, but don't get near until it clears."
He went to the northeast corner.
"But the curse will make the wind change,"
Dor protested.
"The curse is stretched to its limit," the king said. "This magic will not take long, and I don't think the wind can shift in time."
The goblins were now scrambling over the wall, being met by screaming harpies. Dor and Badney and the centaurs drew back to the inner surface of the wall and crowded toward the eastern end, upwind of the proposed release. The king opened his vial. Yellowish smoke puffed out, was caught by the wind, and strewn across the rim of the wall. It sank down upon swarming goblins, and they melted into black goo. They did not even scream. They just sank into the nether mass. They dissolved off the wall, flowed across the stone, coursed in rivulets through the crannies, and dripped out of sight. Harpies snatched at dissolving goblins, got caught by the juice, and melted into juice themselves. A putrid stench rose from the fluid, the odor of hot vomit. The wind gusted sideways, carrying a wisp of magic smoke back across the wall.
"The curse!"
Dor cried in horror. The Kulza centaurs danced back, trying desperately to avoid it. but with the evil humor of the curse, it eddied after them. One got its handsome tail melted away.
"Fan it away from you!" Dor cried. "We need fans!"
Vadney touched the nearest goblin. It became a huge fan. Dor grabbed it from her hands and used it to set up a counter draft. Vadney made another, and the centaurs took these. Together they set up a forced draft. The yellow smoke reared up as if trying to get around, horrible in its mindless determination.
"Where are you going?"
Dor cried at it.
"I'm drifting east another 6 feet, then north over the wall," it replied. "The best pickings are there."
They scrambled out of its projected path. The smoke followed its course, then was gone.
"Ah, Murphy,"
Vadney said.
"it took magician's magic to foil you. But we foiled you."
Dor agreed weakly. King Roogna, narrowly missed by the smoke, stepped away from the parapet.
"It tried to go wrong,
but could not.
Quite."
Dor peered over the wall. There below was a bubbling, frothing ocean of glop, subsiding as the effect penetrated to the bodies underneath. A sinking tide. It ebbed along the rampart and sucked down into the moat, liquefying everything organic. Before long, there was nothing on the north side except the Black Sea.
"More of that on the other walls will abate the whole goblin army,"
Dor remarked to the king, his knees feeling weak and his stomach weaker.
"Several problems," King Roogna said. "First, the wind is wrong for the other sides. It would do as much damage to us as to the enemy. Second, it is not effective against the airborne harpy forces, since it tends to sink and they are flying above it. Third, this vial is all I had. I deemed it too dangerous to store in greater quantities."
"Those are pretty serious problems," Dor admitted. "What other magic is in your arsenal?"
"Nothing readily adaptable, I regret. There is a Pied Piper flute I fashioned experimentally from a flute tree. It plays itself when blown, and creatures will follow it indefinitely. But we don't need to lead the goblins or harpies here. We need to drive them away. There is also a magic ring. Anything passing through it disappears forever. But it is only 2 inches in diameter, so only small objects can be passed. And there is a major forget spell."
Dor considered. "Could you reverse the flute so that it drives creatures away?"
"I might, if the curse didn't foul it up. But it would drive us away, too."
There is that. Could Vadney stretch out the ring to make it larger?" The king searched in a pocket.
"One way to find out."
He brought out a golden ring and passed it to Vadney.
"I really am not skilled with inanimate objects,"
she said, but she took it and concentrated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ring expanded. It stretched out larger and larger, but at the same time the gold that composed it was thinning. At last it was a hoop some 2 feet in diameter, fashioned of fine gold wire.
"That's the best I can do," she said. "If I try to stretch it any farther, it will break."
She looked washed out. This had evidently been a real effort. That should help," Dor said. He picked up the body of a goblin and shoved it through the hoop. It failed to emerge from the other side. "Yes, I think we have something useful here." He returned it to the king, whose fingers disappeared as he took it. But they reappeared when the king changed grips, so It seemed the hoop was not dangerous to handle. But the forget spell, Dor continued. Could it make the goblins and harpies forget what they were fighting about?
Oh, yes, it is extremely powerful. But if we detonated it here at the castle, we would all forget why we're here, even who we are. Thus, Magician Murphy would have his victory, for there would be no completion of the castle. And the goblins and harpies might continue to fight anyway. Creatures of that ilk hardly need reason to quarrel. They do it instinctively. But Magician Murphy himself would forget too. No doubt. But the victory would still be his. He is not vying for power for himself. He is trying to prevent it from accruing to me.
Dor looked out at the barren north view and at the battle still raging elsewhere around the castle. A Pied Piper flute, a magic ring hoop, and a forget spell. A lot of excellent and potent magic that, by the anomaly of the situation, could not seem to be used to reverse the course of this predicament. Murphy, I'm going to find a way, he swore under his breath. This battle is not over yet. Or so he hoped. And there, my friends, is the end of Chapter 10. Therefore, it is also the end of our stream for this evening. I believe that leaves us with chapters 11 and 12, which we will, let's see, where are we at? Which we will finish out. Let's see. Yep, 11 and 12, which we will finish out on the next stream. Oh, happy days. Happy days are here again. I hope you guys have enjoyed this reading this evening. H-Mods, Sonzoic, good evening to the both of you. Glad to see you guys here. Hope you guys enjoyed our reading of Castle Roogna this evening. And thanks so much for being here with me. As always, everyone, the recordings of this will be up on my YouTube channel a little bit later this evening. And thank you to all of you. The greatest gift that you can give to a streamer is the gift of your time. And I appreciate that you guys gave me the gift of yours this evening. I will be back again tomorrow. We should have our Pathfinder game. I believe it is going to be Kingmaker. We start our kingdom tomorrow. And then Thursday, of course, Stompy Mech Night. Hope you guys have yourselves a wonderful evening, a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys all again really soon. Have a great night, everyone.